I don't know, this might not even be Obliqua, who knows?
Don't tell me that.
When I first started doing the Obliqua information, I would share information about Obliqua and people would get really mad at me. It was amazing. Go. What's up, guys? It's Mick Mitty here, and we are coming at you here in the new year, 2020. Finally, it's gonna be year of the plants for everybody, and I'm really stoked to be talking about one of my absolute favorite species, the species that got me into plants in the first place, the species that has been the bane of my existence because everyone is always asking me questions about it, but it doesn't mean I don't love it. Monstera Obliqua. The famous Obliqua. It's never Obliqua, faux Obliqua. It's never Obliqua unless Mick Mitty says. So today, I kind of just wanted to chat a little bit, you know? I've gotten a lot of requests to do this video from a lot of different people. Even though I always talk about Obliqua and I've always really tried to give the most accurate information out there to everybody as I learn it, there's still a lot of confusion. People are still asking questions, which is good, but people are also making up a lot of crap that isn't true. And that's annoying. People kind of abide by these little mantras and these little rules that they come up with for Obliqua, like 10% leaf, 90% whole. And I asked you guys on Instagram the other day to come up with a bunch of different myths and misinformations about Obliqua that I could maybe talk about here. And so, but what I really wanted to talk about too is kind of my experience with Obliqua, how I got into it, how my journey botanically has kind of progressed as a result of keeping this plant, learning about this plant, and just everything around it. I want to talk a little bit about the history of it, at least the history of the Peru form and also the complex at large, and then also talk a little bit about the taxonomy of it and the whole slew of issues that are around this plant that we're going to be facing in the future going forward, talking more about it, because it is a really complicated species. I shouldn't even say species, it's a really complicated species complex, because that's what it is, it's a complex. It's not just one species, because if it was one species it'd be easy, but it's not. It's several different plants that are all lumped together, and you know, I'm gonna get more into that later in the video, but for right now, let's just get into my part of it, which is really, in a lot of ways, the reason that I got into plants in the first place. We're gonna rewind maybe like, what do you think, like 6 years? Is that when I started?
About 6 years, yeah.
About 5 or 6 years ago is when I really started to get into plants. Before I got into plants, I was crazy into reptiles. I was Mr. Herpetologist. I was always digging around in the muck. I never cared about plants. And then for some reason, right after college, something just kind of clicked and I started getting really into plants. It started out with like tillandsias and ferns and bromeliads and orchids. I started collecting them and I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. And then one day I got contacted by Lonnie McCaskill. He used to be one of the curators at the Animal Kingdom at Disney, and now he works up in the Bronx Zoo in Prospect Park. He said, Mick, you gotta come see this great aroid collector who lives on the West Coast. He had all these great aroids in Plant City, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. Like, look at this one, look at that one, all these amazing shapes. And then he showed me this one plant that he had, which he was calling Monstera Obliqua. And I said, huh, that's really weird, you know, Monstera Obliqua, what a really amazing plant. And there it was. It was this tiny leaf, kind of ugly, wrinkly little thing with a lot of holes, and it really stood out to me because it didn't look like any of the other plants in his collection. And of course he had Monstera adansoni and deliciosa climbing up all his trees, and I thought, wow, this is a Monstera? Like, this is really crazy. It stuck with me. And of course the plant I was looking at was this, the Peru form of Monstera Obliqua, which is the famous one that everyone has now. Later on, what happened was I was going on Instagram and I would start seeing posts of people posting different Monsteras, various forms of Monstera adansoni, Lechleriana, whatever, basically anything that had a hole in it. And they were saying, oh, check out how cool my Monstera Obliqua is. I don't like to consider myself a stickler, but I guess in a lot of ways I am completely a stickler. When I see misinformation about something, it irritates me. And so what that caused me to do was start doing research. And that's really difficult. As the complex goes, it's very nebulous. So what I did was I worked backwards. I retraced the steps, trying to figure out where it came from. And what I eventually ended up finding out was that this plant is one clone that is widespread throughout the US now. And it's the Peruvian form of Obliqua. and it came from Marie Selby Botanical Garden. And I thought, okay, so I'll go to Selby and I'll go check it out and see what's there. Go into the conservatory, boom, there it is, you know? And I have a million photos of the first time I was there with it because I was taking selfies with it and I look like a total crazy person because in the conservatory there's all these beautiful orchids and amazing plants, and then just tucked away into this one little corner, growing up a tree fern slab, probably about, you know, a foot off the ground, you had a mature Monstera Obliqua growing there. And of course I was like, oh my God, so amazing. And what I did was I started kind of following the trail of the Peruvian Obliqua, trying to figure out what the story was. So I asked to go behind the scenes at Selby. They said no. And I actually didn't even get to go behind the scenes until just this year, where I saw even more forms of Obliqua, which is amazing. But they did show me their accession data. And on the accession data, I found out where the plant came from. I found out that it was collected 2 times in 1975 and in 1977, both times in the area around Iquitos and Pebas in the Loreto province of Peru. One form was collected near the Rio Ampiacu, and the other one was collected near Pebas. And so that's what it was, you know, it was the Peruvian form of Obliqua. Next was to figure out how it got into cultivation. And what I learned then through talking with other collectors in the Miami area was that there was a grower named Bruce McAlpin who now no longer collects, unfortunately. His collection got destroyed by one of the hurricanes recently, but he used to collect and he used to work at Selby. And what happened was that he ended up with some Monstera Obliqua from their collection because he worked there, and he grew it out. He had an amazing greenhouse for a really long time, and he grew this plant out enormously. And so one year during the Aroid show, probably about a decade ago now, he brought Obliquas to the show and sold them. And from what I'm told from collectors like Enid and other people who were there, he was selling these things for like $8, $10 a piece, you know, little pots of Obliqua for $10 a piece. And that's it. That's how it ended up in the collections of so many people. So in a way, this plant for a long time was fairly common, but also fairly restricted to just the Miami area because that's the only place where the collectors are having it. And so that's how people like Enid Offolter ended up with it. It stayed in the collection, you know, in the collections of these people for years and years and years, and it just was growing out and growing out. And that's how people like me ended up with it. Later on, I would go to the collections of like Enid Offolter at NSC Tropicals, and I can remember one time after Hurricane Irma, we were there kind of, you know, looking through the rubble, and underneath one of her benches, she pulled out this little pot, and the pot was just probably about this big and thick with Obliqua, with just like 20 heads, a huge plant. And I said, oh my God, what is that? And she said, oh, you know, that's the Monstera Obliqua. She had just had it sitting under her bench for, who knows, 8-10 years maybe. She propagated it and then she sold it. And that is in turn how many of you actually ended up with your original plants, was thanks to her. So kind of in my quest to understand more about the taxonomic features of Obliqua, more to understand what made Obliqua, what I started to do was I started to use social media to my advantage. I would go around and basically I would harass botanists and ask them questions about what the story was. Because like I said, nothing recent has been published on this species. No work has really been done around it, at least accurate work, and it's really, really complicated to find any kind of information. So what I did was I started talking to the only other Monstera expert that I knew at the time, David SCHERBERICH from the LYON Botanical Garden. And David is a phenomenal collector, a phenomenal horticulturalist, and he's like the Aroid curator at LYON basically. And he's a great botanist who's also a Monstera expert. And also, he runs the page aroidpics.org, which is the best page to see any kind of aroid photograph. If you want to see, you know, he's got photos of almost every genera and a lot of the species of aroids out there. And he was one of the only people that I knew who actually had real documented photos of Obliqua, not only in cultivation, but also in the wild. And so I was like, I need to talk to this guy. He's amazing. So I sent him a message and I asked him about all this stuff. And so he told me some features about this and that. And I was like, okay, yeah, persistent versus deciduous sheaths, you know, a few, you know, small inflorescences, blah, 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 this and that, right? And it was really, really helpful in understanding. But still, I kind of lacked the larger framework because I'm not a botanist. So I was learning on the fly, trying to understand all these different features, what they meant in relation to other species like Adansonii, why it made them separate. And it was kind of my first introduction to understanding botany as a whole and understanding the amount of work that went into understanding the taxonomy of these plants and understanding the features and characteristics and everything needed to identify these things on the fly. So what he gave me, which was really helpful, was the Michael Madison Monstera revision, which is pretty much like the holy grail document for monsteras if you want to know anything about them. And I thought, awesome, like this is amazing. Unfortunately, the last time that the revision of the genus was done was 1977. 1977. That is crazy amount of time to have no work being done on something, or no work on the genus as a whole being done, right? And so I was like, wow, that's crazy, you know? So I'm reading this black and white document from like 40 years ago, trying to understand what's going on. And it was really, really confusing. And the whole section on Obliqua was just really kind of nebulous. They had all these great information on all the different species, but Madison was a great botanist, but he did the Monstera revision as a PhD project. And I've had a lot of people tell me that that was way too big of a project to try to do for a PhD. And also, he was a lumper instead of a splitter. So when you're talking about science and when you're talking about taxonomy, there's two kinds of schools of thought, right? There's the lumpers and the splitters. The splitters are the people that want to look at the genetics of a living thing and say, okay, well, you see, this one little feature is different, therefore it must be a new species. This one comes from this valley instead of this valley, it's got to be a new species. And for the most part, I tend to agree with them. I think that that's the right way to do it, because the diversity of life is huge, and more often than not, you're going to be having new species instead of the same species over and over again. What he did was he's kind of a lumper. So what he said was, okay, Obliqua, these plants are kind of very generally similar across this huge range. That means that they're all one species. And so that happened with a lot of different species, a lot of different complexes. It happened with the Obliqua complex, happened with the Lechleriana complex, happened with the Spruciana complex. And so that really kind of set discourse back a lot for understanding the genus. And so when he finished his document, his PhD project, I think there was something like 45 or 50 species of Monstera. And now that number has already been pretty much doubled by the work of botanists like Marco Cedeño. And so pretty much what happened was, yeah, David gave me that document, and I read it front to back, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then I went to the Aroid show for the first time, and I talked to Tom Crowett about it. And Crowett, what he told me was basically, you know, similar to what I just explained about lumping and splitting, but he was talking about, he said, oh, the Obliqua complex is Obliqua is really complicated because it's likely going to be several different species in the future, and we're going to be changing things around, and blah, 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 blah. And that just confused the hell out of me. I did not understand, because what my understanding had been was that this was Obliqua, right? The Peru Obliqua, this was Obliqua. I was under the impression that when you had a species, that was it. That was the species. There weren't others. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't going to be changed. You know, that was my understanding. But as time went on, I understood that this Peruvian plant, it wasn't the holotype. The holotype being the plant that was the first one when the description was made, the first one that was collected and put into a herbarium, you know, the holotype, the one that was the original, the OG, right? I thought that was this. Not true. Not true. And so that confused me even more. So what I did was I got on the train and I went up and met with a contact at the New York Botanical Garden, which has one of the largest herbariums in the US, or maybe even the world. It's got like 8 million herbarium slides, like huge. So I went up there and I met with them. I spent like 8 hours the first day sitting there in their like dungeon herbarium looking for slides of Monstera Obliqua, and they had file cabinet after file cabinet full of them. And I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. And I'll show you some images of it just to show you how unbelievably different they are from one another. It's so frustrating. It's crazy. And you know, I documented all of them. I was taking pictures of everything. I was trying to understand everything. And basically what I discovered was that no two clones of Obliqua look the same. No two flowers look the same. No inflorescences look the same. Every single one of them is different. And also, I was extra confused because they occurred in every single country in South America, or every single country in the Amazon. They occurred in all of Western Amazonia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela. They occurred in the Guyanas. They occurred in French Guiana, Guyana, Suriname, Brazil. They occurred in Costa Rica, in Panama, everywhere. Every single country had a different clone. And it wasn't just one clone. It was a different clone in every single region of the country. So it was just like extra confusing, and it just drove me crazy. And they had clones going all the way back from like, you know, the 50s and 60s forward. And it was just like a total mess and really confusing trying to understand what was going on. And so the only logical next step was for me to talk to more botanists. And that actually came in the opportunity of going to Colombia for the Aroid conference. FYI, there's the same conference happening this year in July in Munich, in Germany. So I expect to see you all there if you guys are super serious about plants, because it's really, really awesome. Anyways, what happened was that I was contacted by a friend of mine, Greg Ward, who used to work at Missouri, Mobot, and he told me, I had met him one other time in the Aroid conference, and he said to me, hey man, you want to go to Columbia and go to the Aroid conference? And I was just like, yeah, let's go. And so that's what we did. We hopped on a plane, we went down to Cali, Colombia, which is just an absolutely beautiful area to go to, surrounded by the Western Cordillera, the Farallones de Cali. Gorgeous mountains with lots of amazing species in there, lots of undescribed material. Went out to the bush a lot. We got to see Monstera Obliqua for the first time. Really, really cool. Kind of similar to Obliqua, but not really. Endemic only to one little part of Colombia. Really cool plant, big yellow inflorescence. Awesome to see that. And then what we did was we went to the conference, and that was the first time that I got to meet all these different incredible botanists. I was there with Tom Croat, Joseph Bogner from Germany, Denny Baun, who wrote the Aroid book, Peter Boyce from Borneo. Just so many great botanists. But some of the other people that I got to meet, which is really interesting, was I got to meet Alejandro Zuluaga, which is one of the guys working on revising the Monsteras of Colombia, and so I asked him my Obliqua questions, and I got the same kind of answer that I got from Croat. Oh, it's a very complicated group, we're reworking it, blah blah blah. But then I also got to meet Marco Cedeño, who all of you guys know as the guy who is taking on the huge task of revising the genus of Monstera, right? He's doing the crazy thing that hasn't been done in basically 40 years. And he's breaking it up into pieces, right? So what you guys were all giving money for in the GoFundMe a few months ago was to help him finish a project that was to revise the Central American Monstera. And it was a huge task, ridiculous. It involved him basically going all over Costa Rica, into Panama, into Mexico, and everywhere in between, trying to understand all the different Monsteras that live there, trying to understand their taxonomy, their range, all this kind of stuff, documenting them, making these things that he calls the Lancaster plates, which is a really beautiful way of documenting Monstera. It's supposed to be, it's been historically used for orchids to document their flowering parts, but he's doing the same thing with the Monsteras, and so hopefully we get to make that into a book one day, because it's a really gorgeous way to document these plants and kind of showcase how impressive they are, and how interesting their flowering parts are, which is something that not really many people think about that often, because their flowering parts are freaking tiny. And so anyways, I talked to Marco, and it was his first time out of the country. It was my first time in Colombia, and he gave an incredibly impressive presentation on Monstera, and it just was just like instant connection. I was like, this guy is cool. I need to go talk to him more. I met up with him after the talk, and I was like, because we were talking in Spanish, I was like, dude, like, incredible talk. That was so great. Like, we need to get out into the field, look for Monsteras. Like, you're awesome. And he was like, who is this weird guy? Why is he talking to me about Monsteras? And and so basically, like, we started talking about Obliqua, and he started explaining it to me in a way that I kind of understood, and that kind of led to a good friendship. And recently, Caroline and I were in Costa Rica, and Marcos was there something like 10 days away from getting ready to defend his masters, and he found out I was in the country, and he was like, we're going to go look for Monsteras, man. And so we got in the rental car, and we drove the entire length of the country looking for different Monstera species. We found a bunch of new stuff that I'd never seen before. It was just like so amazing. Saw Monstera filamentosa, membranaceae, all these new species, undescribed stuff. It was a lot of fun. And then just recently, a few weeks ago, here in December, I went out to Missouri Botanical Garden, where Marco is spending the next 2 months working on several different Monstera projects. He's revising the herbarium there. He's looking through all the different specimens, trying to kind of get a better understanding of what's going on in the genus. And so I went there to visit him to see what kind of work he's doing. And man, it was unbelievable, just seeing, first of all, the herbarium collection that Mobot has, which is tremendous. It's got something like 6 million specimens of all kinds of plants, not just aroids. And then of course it's got one of the best aroid collections on the planet, with Tom Croat's something like over 100,000 accessions that he's done. For aroids, for the herbarium that he's put in there, which is just tremendous. He's actually got a species of anthurium that was his 100,000th accession there, which he then named Anthurium centimissimum, to celebrate the 100,000th. English is so difficult. What?
Moving on.
Okay, let me try this again. So I'm just gonna write for the last like 2 minutes.
Okay.
Cut. Yeah. So just to give you guys an idea kind of how distinct these plants look and how different they are from one another, I want to show you a few images and a few plants that I have in my personal collection. I've mentioned it before, I have one of the largest Monstera collections in the world, and I definitely have the largest collection of Obliqua clones out of anybody. And just to give you an idea of how different these things look, I want to show you guys just a few examples of how crazy the level of diversity is, you know? So right here, for example, you've got two plants, right? This is the famous one that everyone has. This is the Peruvian clone of Monstera Obliqua from Selby Botanical Garden. This is the 1975 accession. This is the one that everyone has. Of the two that exist in Selby, you know, you got the 75 clone, which is this guy. It's the original. It's a little bit smaller. And then you've got the 77 clone, which is collected 2 years later in the same kind of region, but it's a very different shape, it's a very different size, very different flower morphology. I mean, it's really amazing to see the two side by side, to see just how distinct they are. And I'll show images there too, but just to kind of drive home the point that even within the same country, even within the same range, in the same locality, plants can look totally different from one another, and it's crazy. I mean, I shared on my Instagram a few months ago a photograph of a Monstera Obliqua that we found in the Talamancas Mountains in Costa Rica. One plant on one tree was huge and it had all these holes, and then 10 feet away on another tree there was another plant with an entire leaf. Both of them were flowering. It wasn't a level of maturity kind of issue. It wasn't a maturity issue. It wasn't a light issue. They were in the same exact area. They just looked totally different. And so that just adds to the confusion of this species, you know. So you got plants, first of all, that are affected by very minute, you know, changes in environment, and then you got plants that just are different looking from site to site, and I don't know why, you know. It's very weird. But anyways, here are two clones side by side. These are probably the only two clones of Obliqua that you're going to find in common cultivation in the U.S., you know. This is the Selby one, and then this is a plant that was collected by Croat, and it's from Bolivia originally, right? A lot of people were calling this the Panama Obliqua for some reason, but the accession is actually incorrect. This actually is a plant that comes from Bolivia, and this is a plant that's currently being grown at the Huntington Botanical Garden in huge quantities. You know, it's growing all over the place. And what's really unique about this one is that it has a mostly entire leaf. You know, it comes from Bolivia, so it's not really all that far away from Peru. It's the kind of same general region, Western Amazonia. If this was any other species, you'd imagine that it would look pretty similar to one another, right? I mean, Monstera dubia, for example, occurs in both those countries, and it doesn't change all that much in shape. So there's something else at play going on here. And this plant is weird, you know, because it has a very similar looking inflorescence and very similar looking flower morphology, and all these different traits are really similar. But as you can see, it just has a completely different leaf, you know. It doesn't get very many holes. I think as a mature plant, it only develops one or two tiny little holes, and it's not very impressive compared to the Obliqua that we all know and love. But currently, these are the same species, right? So one of two things is happening. One, either they are the same species, and this plant just has a lot of like phenotypic plasticity, where it just changes enormously in shape and size all over the place, you know, from country to country. Or what's really going on here is that these are all different species, and they need to be desperately reworked so that we can have a better understanding of what's going on. And as a splitter, I tend to side with the second mentality, that these are different species in different countries, and it makes a lot more sense to say that than it does to say that this is a plant with a range that extends through all of South America and all of Central America, and they just look crazy different from place to place. And it's just, yeah, so I mean, those are two examples. I have some other examples of plants if you guys want to see them. I've got one really interesting clone that was collected in the state of Pará in Brazil. It was collected, I think, by Jean-Marie Pellet Botanical Garden in France, and again, it's a really weird clone. You know, this is another entire leaf specimen. This is a plant that has, you know, a leaf with no holes at all, but the inflorescence is really similar to all the other Obliquas that we know. You know, it's got this long peduncle that sticks out, and then boop, just a tiny little flower with a very short, squat kind of spadix and a very yellow spathe and spadix kind of, you know, coloration. It's, you know, there's a really beautiful photograph that I have that Genevieve Fieri took, and the plant almost looks like it's glowing. It's so yellow. It's really brilliant. And then of course, after the anthysis happens and after the infrutescence starts forming, when the fruit dehisces and falls off, the styler caps, they're bright orange, you know. And this may seem like it's a trait that's you know, exclusive to Obliqua, but in fact a lot of Monsteras do this, and it's not. You know, when I first started, I thought that the yellow and then the orange coloration was like a very, very concrete characteristic, but it's not. You know, that's just something that happens in a lot of different species. But it is interesting because when you see the different flowers of Obliqua, and mind you, I haven't seen all that many personally, but they all seem to have that trait. So it's a very interesting thing, and I can understand how that trait was used to kind of lump these species together way back in the day. Another interesting clone that we have is one that comes from, here it is. This is a plant that actually comes from Missouri Botanical Garden, and it's just really unique because this one's hiding in one little corner of the climatron, which is their beautiful conservatory there, and Marco actually didn't even notice it the first time he walked through there, and then when I was there, it just happened to be in flower, and I said, "Oh my God, it's Obliqua!" And so we ran back and we went, and then Marco, we collected a bunch of the inflorescences in the flowering parts, and he created a Lancaster plate like in a day, and I posted it on my Instagram to show all you guys, and it's just really incredible, and he was telling me that this specimen more than any other really resembled the holotype that came from it leaked on me. That's the problem with these hanging pots. He told me that more than any other, this plant really resembled the holotype, which originally was collected in Suriname, which is really interesting. And the really cool thing about this form is that when it flowers, it has the same kind of yellowish inflorescence and orange infructescence that the other forms have. But what's really cool about this one is that it is the only clone that I've seen in flower that smells, that has fragrance. This blew my mind, because I've seen flowers before in a handful of other specimens, but I've never seen one that smells before. I remember way back when I went to New York Botanical Garden, I read in one of the descriptions of one of the Obliquas that the inflorescence smells like ripe bananas, and I thought, wow, that's so cool. And so in every other place I've been to, I've smelled them and I've tried to see what was going on, and none of them never any fragrance, or maybe I didn't catch it at the right time, but this one was like, bah, whoa, crazy. It smelled so strong. It was unbelievable, like seriously like a ripe banana, and it just blew me out of the water. I was so amazed. And I recommend it. If you guys ever go to Mobat, man, go over there, find it in flower, smell it, it'll blow your mind. It's really, really impressive, and I was really stoked that I had found that plant. Unfortunately, the problem with that plant is it doesn't have any accession data, so no one knows where it was collected, and I gotta ask Tom what the story is with it. I gotta figure out where it's from, because it's gonna be really, really integral in figuring out, kind of understanding the larger picture of Obliqua. And so a little while ago I was talking about the holotype of Obliqua, and like I mentioned before, the holotype basically represents like the type specimen. It's the first plant that was ever found and described to kind of help described as that species, right? So someone was walking around Suriname where the type specimen was found and said, what a cool plant. I'm going to collect this, I'm going to call it Monstera Obliqua, and that's what it's going to be, and it's a type specimen. So the original Obliqua, Suriname, it's found in Suriname. It's not this, Suriname. That was the mistake I made. I thought this was the type specimen. No. This is, I don't know, this might not even be Obliqua, who knows? But the type specimen is from Suriname.
Don't tell me that.
I don't want to hear that either. Can you imagine? But the type specimen is from Suriname, which is really amazing. And so that's actually where I found the first Obliqua that I saw in the wild. I went to the Central Suriname Nature Reserve, and I was there by the Voltsberg, and the Voltsberg is this amazing granite mountain that is there. It's such a famous mountain that it's actually on the money in Suriname. It's like a national icon. But there at the base of the Voltsberg, I was walking along, like I think it was 2 years ago, and I was like through the forest, and I looked. And up above me, I saw these two infructescences sticking up on that long peduncle, and I said, no way, Obliqua, and there it was, sure enough. But the really amazing thing about this plant was that it matched the holotype. It matched the holotype, right? It had the few inflorescences, and it also had the big entire leaf, and I thought, wow, this is crazy, this is amazing for me to be able to find this. And so I documented the hell out of it, and I was really excited to find that plant. And it was really impressive and interesting for me to find it, because it kind of blew my mind a little bit, because everything that I had known about Obliqua up until that point was that this Peruvian form was the holotype. This is what Obliqua was supposed to look like. And after all my investigations, and after going to the herbariums, and after traveling around the world and seeing these plants in the wild and seeing them in other collections, what I started to discover was that Obliqua is not what we think it is. It's not this wholly 90% whole leaf. It's the or 90% whole, 10% leaf myth. It's a very diverse, very complicated complex of plants. It's likely going to be reworked in the future. It's likely going to end up that Obliqua gets split up into a million different things. They're going to resurrect a bunch of old names that haven't been used in 50 years, and they're going to make a bunch of new species. You know, so in a way, it's kind of sad, but in another way, it's really, really exciting, because what's going to happen is we're going to get a better understanding of the taxonomy of these plants. We're going to get a better knowledge of what's happening, why they're changing, why there's so much diversity, you know, and we're also going to get a better understanding of you know, what is where. And we're going to get a more clear picture of what's going on with this plant. So in some ways I'm kind of upset, but in a lot of ways I'm also really, really excited, you know. And as I mentioned before, you know, can you imagine what would the world do if we suddenly changed the name of this, you know, change it from Obliqua to something else, maybe change it to, you know, Expellata or something, you know? What if the plant that we thought we knew as Obliqua, the thing that everybody knows as Obliqua, turns out to be something else, you know? But this is the way that science works. Things change, things are fluid, they're not always set in stone, it's not always law, right? And so that's just the point that I'm trying to make with this video, is I'm trying to show you guys that there's a lot of fluidity, a lot of plasticity in naming things, and names are just names. Names can change. That doesn't make the plant any more or less impressive, you know? So when I started this journey, I wanted to understand very clearly, you know, what is Obliqua and what isn't. And instead what I ended up discovering was that Obliqua is really complicated, and it's a bunch of different things, and what we know as Obliqua might not be Obliqua. What we think wasn't Obliqua might actually end up being Obliqua, and I don't know what the world is going to do if suddenly the name Obliqua gets assigned to this ugly little leafless thing, you know? I think everyone just might lose their minds. And so anyways, I mean, I could drone on and on about this, and I think I've already talked quite a lot about Obliqua, but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more of context, get you guys to understand a little bit about what I understand about this plant and why I love it so much, you know, because part of the thing that I am so attracted to about this is not only the beauty of the plant, but also the mystery of the plant. There's so much we don't know about this, and there's so many dedicated people working with this plant, and you know, it's the thing that originally got me into botany, and in a lot of ways I'm really glad that it is not a clear answer, because if it was a clear answer, that means that the journey would just end there. Instead, the journey gets to continue on, and I get to go on more adventures, I get to travel around more, I get to look for more different clones, I get to understand this plant better, and then in turn I get to share that information with all of you. And I'm so happy that there's a community of people who actually care about this kind of stuff, so that I can actually share this information with you and have people that are engaged and interested in hearing about it. I'm really pleased about that.